Thanks, Chris. It's quite interesting listening to George and Colin speak and to go right back to something Colin said really early. It's critical these days, the relationships you all have with your owners corporation. Gone are the days when I started in Strata, the building gets put up, it's handed over to the owners corporation, that's it, it's yours to deal with. And there was always a sort of conflict between the owners corporation and the developers. The developers that I've been dealing with on a sort of day-to-day basis have got a lot better at it, and we're getting into scenarios where we're talking with owners corporations, putting deeds in place at the end of the current 2-year period so that we're not commencing proceedings. It's saving money for you guys, it's saving money for the owners corporations, and there's a proper discussion about how to deal with this and get through it. The other thing that's coming out of it is how time critical all of this is. I mean, I know that we're sitting back at the moment saying, right, it's not really going to affect any building till it comes into place in another sort of 18 months. But I'll show you a couple of things in a moment that we know that you need to be thinking about it in terms of your finance and everything now. Okay. So the bond has to be in a form approved by an authorised deposit-taking institution, in that it's got to be a bona fide institution-backed guarantee. It can't be another way to go through and deal with it. And when calculating the bond amount, if the developer and the builder are connected, a QS report is required to determine the amount. We can't just rely on sort of a contract that's there, and the cost for the QS obviously stands with the developer. Term for the bond, a minimum of 2 years, maximum of 3. But we note this could extend longer if required pre-construction commencement for finance or security purposes. Chris, I'm sure we'll go into it a little bit later on when we go through the Q&A. We've got scenarios now where if you're looking at finance, it's being tied in as part of the finance. So when I talk about time critical, you guys need to be having these discussions now. Number 2, we'll go into it a little bit further along. You're going to back-to-back your agreement, so you need to be thinking about this in terms of your contracts where you are putting sort of people in place. The bond can be used to fund the interim and final reports should the developer not pay. And if drawing down the bond to rectify the defects, the developer and the OC must agree. If not, a QS is appointed. Now, this has come out of the Office of Fair Trading's information. George went on a little earlier that there's no mechanism to tie it together. So it's interesting because I went looking through the legislation, couldn't see anything specifically there. So obviously they've made some determination for some reason. The cost for that QS report, we've had it confirmed, however, would be a split cost between the owners corporation and the developer. So it's not something that would be borne wholly and solely by the developers. Going on to the portal, George was talking about the portal a little earlier. So it's going to sit wholly and solely as an obligation of the developers to make sure all of this stuff is put up on a portal. And the documents need to be loaded up there. I guess the important thing here that you guys need to consider is we've all dealt with government departments before. And we know how one-dimensional they can be with their processes at times, and computer says no. So you're up there trying to load all of this information, and if something doesn't comply exactly with what they want, they're going to push back and it's going to delay your occupation certificates. So again, we get into time critical, and you need to plan and make sure you've got everything along the way and documenting, and it's sitting in your hand, so as soon as you need to go forward with it. $1,500 for the lodgement of all of this sort of stuff. So I don't know if anyone's been aware of that. The website's up now. You can go and sort of maybe one thing you want to look at doing. And I was thinking about this earlier. Is you need to get registered. For the larger players, is it one login that's used by the whole corporation, or do each of your different development teams have a separate login? I'm not too sure. That's something you're going to need to go and have a look at. Cost of the report. George went on before $500 sort of dollars. We started a process sort of 2 years ago where we've been working with a number of you where we get the owners corporation to engage consultants, both fire and general in most instances, And from there, we speak with the builders about following the consultants as they're doing the work. It's helping in two instances. One, there is a discussion nice and early between the consultants and the builders to identify what the issues are. Number two, what we're now starting to see is that the maintenance team is literally following the consultants as they go along. You know, door tags missing on a fire door, instead of trying to get access to that apartment twice, they're following them through and going, right, we're checking if the door tag's there, let's just stick the door tag on, things like that. They're getting on top of it a whole lot earlier. And the advantage is if we can get the stuff rectified before the guy's finishing his reports at the moment, why even put it in there as a defect because it's been rectified. Consultants on site, yep, sign it off. I don't need to include it in the report. We're getting on top of it early. Essentially, the cost of those reports is costing, on average, $600 to $700 per lot. One thing I don't know that sort of George picked up on, so it's okay, mate, you didn't steal too much thunder. That's for one inspection based on visual. You guys have to pay it twice. So if they go through the whole site, so you guys are looking at $1,200 to $1,400, and that's not taking into account any additional disciplines. That's just your fire and your general defects. George went through the test procedures and the likes, and if we use the water baths, guys, I'd be talking to your construction guys, take photos of stuff. You know, you get architects to design it a certain way. If you think that there's going to be an issue, yeah, get a photo of it so that when the guys are walking through doing the inspections, you're able to show it. We also know of some of the other guys, some of you in the room, that are already starting to engage with the likes of George when they're around the design time. They know issues that have happened in previous buildings. It's like, look, this is how we're designing it. Yeah, no, don't do that with the balcony. Change it this way so that you avoid tiles popping, so on and so forth. So again, going back to the relationship, it's not just the relationship with the owners' corporations, it's the relationship with the guys doing the reports, because we can save each other time.
Sorry, would that be an example of the year issue of like is the expected part of the design and construction process?
Yes.
Presumably they can't be used.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So one of the things that we've tried to do around this process is start, bringing a number of consultants to the table, because, we'll go through it. I'm sure it'll be another question for George later. How many of these inspectors have we actually got out there that are going to do these sort of reports? I think you'd be quite surprised how many put their hands up. And to be honest with you, a lot of the guys that are doing the reports that you've seen at the moment, they're sort of not going to go near it because they can make money out of the Home Building Act process. And I've got some opinions on how we sort of deal with that in future and the likelihood, or not likelihood, but how the legislation should possibly change to make it more effective for everyone involved. Access has been referred to. It's going to affect time-critical sort of issues. And when we do have to get access, I mean, if you ask Colin, if you go to NCAP for anything at the moment, 6 to 8 weeks used to be, you're looking at 3 months. That stuffs this whole process if we're just trying to get into someone's apartment. Insufficient time period. In here, obviously, we're referring, interim report has to be delivered at 15 months, and between that, rectification, follow-up inspection, final report, you've got 9 months. Sure, we can start the inspections after 12 months when it's the inspector's appointed, but 9 months to get it all done. And that's what I said, we've sort of started a process, we saw this coming a while off, getting the inspector in after sort of 12 months and having your maintenance teams follow them to get the stuff fixed. We need to get more efficient about it. It's also going to have flow-on effects. A number of you do build some large stage developments these days, and we've worked with you over time. You've got something coming up, we're going through defect repairs. You're trying to get completion to the next stage. You're pulling teams off sort of the defect repairs to get that done. You're not going to have that availability to do that anymore. You've got timeframes that you have to meet, so you're going to have those extra guys on site. There's extra cost involved as a result. The other one is with regards to, if you look at the legislation, it says inspect the whole of the building. Some of the stuff that's coming around the reports is you can do sample. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you do a 20% sample and the guy still identifies a number of them and then makes an assumption that it's throughout the building, are you better off just getting the whole report and just picking up exactly where it is, because you could pick 5 or 6 units and it just reoccurs just in those couple of units. So they just make an assumption that could be incorrect. On the inspectors, high likelihood, obviously the owners corporation disagreeing. I think this comes back to the relationship between the owners corporation and you guys as the developer. I see a scenario here where you'll get, if the developer and the owners corporation agree but an owner says no, both of you going back to the secretary and saying, hold on, let's let cool heads prevail. Cannot continue approving until 12 months or so. Secretary can appoint if you can't approve on it. You can't agree on the appointment of the inspector. Access is not provided, however, it can possibly offset the liability of the bond scheme in respect of those apartments. So if you haven't been able to get in there and work out what needs to be done, that may reduce. And a big issue is the competency or capacity of the experts, enough of them being there. And we also all know when we've dealt with experts over time, and you know, George is a good expert, but I've dealt with experts myself where you sit there and it's like, have you got a point to prove? Sometimes you need to be commercial about getting some of these things fixed, and some of them just want to dig their heels in the whole way. A couple of quick tips and pitfalls. It's interesting in the legislation, and when we have a look at the legislation, every time we read it, we see something different. The initial period doesn't expire in the first 12 months. The developer needs to notify the secretary, and that's all it says. It doesn't say what happens from there. We're assuming that at that point, the secretary can possibly appoint someone, vary the time frame for the reports and the likes, but this could be a potential conflict with the bond expiry, because if they extend out when you need to do the reports, but your bond finishes before that period, what do we do in that instance? In a lot of instances, the DLP periods we've discussed with some in the room, in your contracts are being extended to 2 and 3 years to mirror the bond, so that you can still, obligate your contractors and your builders to come back and get stuff fixed. As we said before, document everything, even if it's taking photos along the way. And there's a risk of the occupation certificate not being issued due to non-compliance with the Secretary's requirements around lodging the bond and the likes. Whole process, as we said, time critical and likely cause massive pressure on everyone. And as both Colin and George referred to, we're seeing a dual track defects process. As I said, engaging with your current OCs at the moment and working, at this time, and working out consultants that you say can work with. The way I see it in future is that you'll have a scenario where you guys will work with some of these consultants over time and say to the owners corporation, right, get them in. We've worked with them, we see them as reasonable operators, and we'll rely on those reports. Now, they may not be approved by the secretary, but maybe that's some application the owners corporation and the developer make. Initial maintenance schedule can cause you a level of confidence yourselves, because you can de-risk by putting maintenance requirements back on the owners corporation. If they don't meet the maintenance requirements, I would say as long as they're reasonable, try and tell an owners corporation that they've got to clean aluminium on the side of the building once a week, obviously, but saying it's quarterly, could be reasonable. And software solutions, Building Link obviously helping support us today, but having ways that you're able to communicate with your owners and your owners corporations as a whole to make sure that we effectively and efficiently get into all the apartments and go through everything. The relationship management of individual owners, but as I said, the relationship management between you guys and your owners corporations is going to be critical all the way through this process. Thanks, guys.